Hey there, we're talking about the Chicago mayoral race because even though results aren't final, we know who's going to be in the runoff. It will be a Vallas Johnson runoff, which is a shock if you asked us 3 months ago what this would be, but we did predict this over a week ago that this is how it was going to turn out. You'll notice we're not in studio here as we do this video. It's because it is late at night and we are just done with being at the office. Even Dustin, my dog, look at him, poor guy, even he's done. He's ready to go to bed. So we're here on Zoom to talk about the race. Chris, what did you see on the ground today that led to these results?
So today on the ground, I saw high enthusiasm amongst white voters, even in areas where they're not the majority. I saw low enthusiasm amongst Latino voters, and I saw relatively low enthusiasm about the mayoral race amongst black voters, which I think is led to the results today. Vallas performed extremely well against whites once we see these ward results, and we're going to be able to see ward by ward how everything broke down for Brandon Johnson and Lori Lightfoot very soon.
Yeah, and overall voter turnout was down. We're right around 500,000 votes right now. There are still vote by mail ballots coming in, so we will break 500,000, but nowhere near the 600,000 that some were predicting. And low turnout is gonna benefit that candidate who has a really strong base. That was Vallas, that was Johnson, hence the results from tonight's election. Does that sound like it recaps it pretty well, Chris?
Yes, and that goes into one of Lori Lightfoot's biggest problems going into this race is that she lacked a cohesive base that she had in 2019. We talked about her expanding out to black voters, especially black women. We're going to see how it looks at the ward level very shortly, but it wasn't enough to win her this election. Brandon Johnson had a core group of progressives who were going to vote for him, and Vallas obviously was able to monopolize that white vote.
All right, real quick, before we talk about what the next 5 weeks are going to look like, give me a candidate who surprised you or who impressed you out of those 9 who ran. Who impressed you?
Well, honestly, the one who impressed us the most has to be Brandon Johnson. He came in the last month or so with a steam at his back, money from the teachers union. He spent it effectively. He got his voters to the polls, and he was able to move people away from Lori Lightfoot to get him in this position right now. He's ran an impressive campaign down the stretch, and he deserves to make this runoff.
Okay. I'm going to go outside of the main 4 or 5 candidates. Honestly, she only got, 1-2% of the vote, but Sophia King really impressed me. I know very little about her other than what I saw in this race, but I got to be honest, I was impressed with what I saw. So in terms of candidates who might have a future, she's someone I'll be looking at as we go forward. All right. What's this race look like? Let's talk about next steps. There are 2 candidates, and it's going to be a fascinating election. The average voter in Chicago is left of center, and what you have right now are candidates on either end of the spectrum. You've got a mainstream, more moderate Democrat who's to the right of the average Chicago voter, and then you have a progressive, very a liberal candidate in Johnson who's to the left of the average Chicago voter. Neither one is in that mainstream and sort of that left of center lane. It's going to be a fascinating race to watch. Chris, what do you see? How do you see this race playing out? What do you think is the most important thing to look at or the most important issue?
So for me, we have to start with Brandon Johnson. Brandon Johnson is a progressive. So in order to win this election, he's going to have to moderate himself to a large swath of the population. We're going to be talking about the main issues of this race, mainly crime, but that's an issue that Brandon Johnson has to come to the middle on. If he maintains his status to the left of the majority of voters, he's not going to do well in this race. Paul Vallas, he needs to expand outward from a racial perspective. He's done a very good job of appealing to white voters and getting their votes, but he will not win a race for mayor of Chicago in 2023 off the bat of white voters. He needs to start doing Latino outreach, and he has to start doing black outreach to win this race.
Yeah, you certainly saw he got plenty of Latino support in this election. Those conservative Latinos in every poll and in the election were supporting Vallas, so you can see that he has some inroads already. I'd imagine one of his first phone calls is going to be to Willie Wilson. If he could somehow splinter off some more conservative black votes, that's going to put him in a pretty good position. Do you agree?
I would agree. And judging from some of the conversations I had earlier with voters in the 21st ward, that crime message is going to resonate if structured properly to African-American voters. The only question is how it gets to them, the people who are explaining it to them. He's going to need black liaisons in order to win this race, but the votes are there if he can market himself properly.
As you mentioned, crime is the issue. A poll taken in early February showed that crime is far and away the top issue in this election. And I'd imagine Brandon Johnson has some key weakness there. You saw it already play out where Lightfoot was able to start to stem the tide of his impressive surge in the final few weeks with that crime narrative. I've got to imagine Vallas is going to hit him hard on crime. What do you do if you're Johnson and you deal with that issue of crime, especially as it relates to black voters and black turnout? Because he's going to need every vote out of those black wards if he's going to have a chance.
Well, he's going to have to talk about crime. You can't run away from crime in the city of Chicago these days. What he's been doing has been addressing what progressives like to do is they like to address the root causes of crime. That's not a bad strategy if you have to talk about the issue. But he's going to have to move away from some of the harsher rhetoric he's used in the past. He hasn't used the words defund the police, and he's going to have to try and move away from anything related to that. And he's got to come to the middle on this issue somehow.
I'd imagine it's going to be a tightrope for him. I mean, his base is progressives. His base is the Chicago Teachers Union. They probably don't want to see him moderate on that issue. So he's certainly going to have a tightrope to walk there. In terms of getting additional support, Chris, where's the money come from in this race? Vallas has been pretty well funded. My guess is he'll probably look to groups like 150 to even further strengthen that funding support. The CTU seems like they're all in for Johnson, but how much more money do they have? Where does the support come from and the money come from for these candidates?
You bring up an excellent point regarding labor unions. Many labor unions were either backing Lori Lightfoot or, as you mentioned, 150 was backing Chuy Garcia. They now lack a solid home in this election. And with the service unions and the teachers union backing Johnson, it's a really good lane for Vallas to tap into if he can get it. In addition, Vallas is going to have his pool of very wealthy donors downtown who might be willing to write another $100,000 check for him. But other than that, I see that's where Vallas's money comes from. Brandon Johnson, he's going to keep focusing on the small dollar donors in addition to the big money from the teachers union. Though there has been struggles there. The teachers union recently had a big scandal of where they were pulling their money from, whether or not it was dues or whether or not it was something else. So if the teachers union can't afford to donate any more money, he's going to have to find other avenues. Maybe he asks the SEIU for another check. Maybe he calls the unions himself. He's at the county, so he's going to have those relationships. We'll have to see what he gets from there. But that's what I would do for either candidate.
Okay. Looking at this race, I mean, it's impossible to predict 5 weeks out. We need more data before we make a call. But I'll tell you one thing I'll be watching is who frames this race, who frames the debate. You saw it already. We're shooting this on election night. You saw it in the election night speeches for both Vallas and Johnson. What you saw was that Vallas was very focused on the issues, and Johnson was already on the attack. This is a race where if the election becomes about the issues, especially crime, Vallas is going to win. If this race is about anything else, Johnson wins. And so Johnson's going to make this, he's going to be on the attack. Vallas will have to attack back. It's going to be interesting to see how this race plays out. But you already saw it. If this is about the issues, crime, even education, and some of those issues, you're going to see Vallas do pretty well. If this is a race about personalities, about politics, about all those ancillary things that our campaigns tend to be about nowadays, then Johnson has a really good shot. So with that groundwork, we're not going to make our picks today. It's still 5 weeks out. But Chris, how do you see this race playing out tentatively? What do you think is going to be the final result?
The final result of this race, I think Brandon Johnson's going to eke this out. One of the biggest issues is that politics is becoming very polarized. And those little party issues, the social issues, the national issues are creeping into politics, even in Chicago. With that, I think Johnson's going to have a chance. Vallas is he's gotten away with it so far because he's had such a strong base, but those issues from the first round are going to come back in the second round. And Johnson's going to have the money to back him up this time. So I think Paul Vallas is going to have a difficult path, but that's not to say it can't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say Vallas is your safest choice right now. He's number one going into the runoff. He has a clear path to 50% plus one. I mean, there are supporters there that he can gain. And so if you were going with the safe bet, you'd say Paul Vallas. As I did in the first round where I didn't go with the safe bet, I'd say Johnson plays this right and pulls it off for many of the reasons you mentioned, Chris. But it's going to be really interesting to watch. I think there are plenty of opportunities for Johnson to screw this up, whereas Vallas is probably going to stay pretty steady in the upper 40s to low 50s. The question will be, does Johnson play this right or does he screw it up? He is, remember, mostly a rookie at this. And so projecting out that he's not going to make some major mistakes is probably an inaccurate assumption. So we got 5 weeks to see how this plays out. It's going to be fascinating. We'll keep watching the race. We'll keep informing you of what's going on. There are links to our social media profiles with this video. Please stay in touch with us, just like you'll see on Twitter, where we had exclusive information all day. We'll continue to share with you information as this race unfolds from now to April 4th.